Last Sunday, we saw Jesus for the gospel going into his hometown of Nazareth and going to the synagogue on a Saturday and preaching to his fellow brothers from Nazareth. And the reaction of people from Nazareth was twofold. On one hand, they were surprised because of his wisdom. And they said, where does he get his wisdom from? But at the same time, there was a certain skepticism because they said, isn't he the son of Mary, the carpenter, the brother of such and of such? So last Sunday, we could see Jesus in his hometown having a poor reception of the message he offered to the people from Nazareth. In this present Sunday, it is no longer Jesus who is preaching, but it is the first time in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus sends out the apostles. So it's no longer Jesus going to preach himself, but it is the first time that he sends the 12, 2 by 2, to preach conversion, to expel the unclean spirits, and to pray over the sick. So today in this homily, I want us to analyze together the conditions in which the apostles are sent out for this mission. The first observation that I want to make is that the apostles were clearly unprepared for the task and the mission they received. Think about this. How many of the apostles had training to be preachers? How many of the apostles were theologians or Pharisees or instructed in scriptures? They were fishermen, tax collectors, completely and utterly unprepared for the mission of preaching. I'm pretty sure that when Jesus said, now it's your time to go 2 by 2 preaching, the apostles thought maybe, Jesus, don't you want to preach for a little longer so that we can learn a little bit more before it's our turn? They were completely unprepared. And that's why the church chose this first reading from the prophet Amos. Because Amos finds himself in the same situation. What does Amos say about himself? He says, I'm not a preacher. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a son of prophets. So what we see is Jesus sometimes calls us and invites us for a mission even when we are unprepared to fulfill that task. I want to give you an example from the real life, or another example from the real life. Back in Peru, we were close friends with a bishop called Alcides Mendoza. And you know how old was this bishop when he was ordained a bishop? He was ordained a bishop when he was 30 years old. 6 years younger than me. Imagine me as a bishop, or don't imagine me as a bishop. He was called to be a bishop when he was 30 years old. And I don't know if you knew this, but in the Second Vatican Council, he was the youngest bishop of all, and he was a Peruvian bishop. And I can imagine that this young priest, 30 years old, he had all of the excuses to say, I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. I'm just a new priest. But Jesus calls us to fulfill a mission even when we feel unprepared. I want to give you an example from my own life. A couple of months ago, I got the message. Father David is leaving for Detroit. Now it's your turn to be a pastor for a month. And I had all sort of haters, people laughing at me. It's too soon for you to be a pastor. 1 week into the mission, and the church is still standing. But not only that, the point I'm trying to make is, God calls us even when we have the sense that we are unprepared. So take this for your life. I'm certain that there's going to be a moment in your life when God is going to call you for something. Maybe for marriage, maybe for something. And you will feel like, I'm unprepared. But remember, God calls us, even when we feel unprepared, and we're called to respond in the same way that the apostles. Going even when they knew that perhaps they weren't well equipped enough, because God will help them on the way. Second observation. Not only does he send them pretty soon and being unprepared, but Jesus also puts even harder conditions. He says, take no money, take no provisions for the way. So the apostles, they were not only sent very soon in their life, but they were also sent without anything to take with them. So I imagine the apostles thinking like, so not only are we sent right now, but we can't take anything with us? But then think about this. Why does Jesus want the apostles to experience need? Why does he want to put them in a place of necessity? And we can answer this from my own experience and from our own experience. Maybe God is putting you right now in some sort of need. Maybe right now in your life, there's need for better finances. Maybe in your life, there's a need for a better relationship with your spouse. Maybe in your life, there's right now a need for better health. Look at your life. You will always find a need. But do you know why God allows us to have needs and why he sends the apostles with needs? Because only when we find ourselves in a place of necessity, we understand how dependent we are on God. When we have everything covered, we don't need the Lord. We are self-sufficient. But God wanted the apostles to be in the position of need, and he allows in your own life for there to be need so that you can recognize how much truly you depend on the Lord. So don't be complaining about your need, but see better how your need can lead you to a place of being less self-sufficient and more dependent on the Lord. Last observation. Jesus also anticipates that the disciples will be rejected. In the same way that Jesus was rejected in Nazareth, Jesus lets the disciples know that they will also be rejected. And does he say, when you're rejected, cry for a week, be sobbing, come back all, depressed? He says, when you're rejected, clean out the dust from your feet and keep going. And keep going. And you know who's the greatest example of this capacity to overcome rejection and keep preaching the gospel? St. Paul. If you look at the Acts of the Apostles, it's an amazing testimony of resilience. Paul made 3 great journeys, or 4, I don't remember. That's why I shouldn't be a bishop. And Paul, he was imprisoned. He was almost stoned to death. He was thrown from the synagogue. He faced all sorts of rejection. What did Paul do when he was rejected? Did he stay down sobbing and being sorry for himself? He cleaned the dust from his feet and kept going. And this is a beautiful reminder for each one of us that if you ever have the audacity to preach the gospel or to want to be apostolic with someone, it is very likely that you will be rejected. It is very likely that this person will turn you down. But when you get turned down, never be depressed. Never take it personally. Shake off the dust off your feet and keep going. And I think this can also lead us to a very useful question. And the question is, how do I handle rejection? How do I handle failure in my life? When someone turns me down, when someone says no, when someone doesn't answer in the way that I expected, what is my reaction? Do I have that capacity to keep going? To shake off the dust from my feet? Or am I a person that is extremely brought down by rejection? And I think that today the gospel is inviting us to understand that rejection will always happen, but we shouldn't take it so personally. So brothers and sisters, number one, God calls us even when we're unprepared. In the same way that he sent the 12 apostles completely unprepared for the mission of preaching, exercising, and healing the sick. So be ready for that moment when God calls you. And being unprepared should never be an excuse to say no to the Lord. Second, Jesus sends them in a situation of need and necessity. So the apostles can always remember how much they should rely on the Lord. If right now in your life you find yourself in a situation of need, health, finances, struggling against a particular sin, remember that God allows us to be in necessity because only when we're in need we truly rely on Him and we turn to Him. Sometimes this happens, I forget the third idea, but that's okay.